Hey guys, Andy here at MVP Java. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about communication between JavaFX controllers. So I have a nice tabbed demo to show you that specifically concentrates on setting this up. And as I'm going to be setting this up, I'm going to cover I guess you can call them the three gotchas that are surely the details in this demo that really puts everything together. Okay, and then at the end I'm going to cover what I find are some annoying issues about JavaFX and how it goes about with this controller communication. And we will have some follow-up questions to see what else can be done about those annoyances. So first things first, let's take a look at the demo. It is a demo with two tabs, all right? So you've got a tab with NASA missions, you click on the mission, you get an update on that. And every time you click on a mission, the logger tab gets a log message. Okay, and it'll even get the stack traces if there's anything wrong. So obviously I've set it up that every tab has its own controller. And the NASA missions tab needs to get a reference to the logger tab's controller in order to send that message over here, right? Now, you obviously don't want to do this all in one controller because as the development continues, that controller becomes, totally unmaintainable. It becomes a monster. So that's why we're doing this, is because we want to have that decoupling, that maintainability. So let me close this and let's go to Scene Builder because Scene Builder is how I built this application. So here's the main view. You can take a look here, main.fxml. And I have here the preview of that just to bring home the point. And I have my tab pane and I have two tabs, right? So the NASA missions tab and the logger tab. Now what I've done is I've created two separate views to be included under each tab to make it more maintainable. So if I say edit included file, you'll notice I have another console tab.fxml that specifically just concentrates on what's going to be within that tab. So I got my label, I got my list view, got my text area. And the reason why I'm doing this, I'm separating them, is because it really makes your GUI application much more maintainable. I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally touched or modified something without realizing it, only to know that I did something wrong 20 minutes later, and then you try to figure that out, and it's a real mess, okay? So that's the logger here. So I got my text area and I got some buttons that right now don't do anything. So that's the second tab, just the contents of it. So when I go to my main, right, over here, usually, well, they always have a default anchor pane for you when you drag and drop an anchor pane. I remove that and then I click on anchor pane here. You say file, include FXML, and you go get your, in this case, console tab, you say open, and then you just drag it here. And then for the same thing over here, you file, you got to make sure you click on the anchor tab to do that or else it won't work. Include FXML, you go get this case, the logger tab, and then you just drag it underneath here, okay? So now, anytime you want to drill down, you just right click, edit, whoops, sorry, my mouse is going a little crazy, edit, and edit included file, and you're gonna have, in this case, the logger tab show up, okay? So that's pretty cool, separating your views like that. Now, first things first, you have to give a name, right, or an ID rather, to your root element. So in this case, this is the logger tab. You have to give an FX ID, okay? So in this case, I'm calling it logger tab. Now here's the first got you. It's gotta be FX ID. There is another ID under the properties, okay? If you actually go here and do a search, you'll see it here, and you might give it to that one. Big mistake. If you do that, things are not going to work, okay? It's very frustrating. It's got to be under the code fold here, and it's got to be the FX ID. All right, so that's definitely a first gotcha there. You go to the console tab, do the same thing, okay? Oops, sorry, it's the root element, right? So the console tab over there. So now that you've got those IDs, that'll allow you to inject the controllers eventually, okay? So now, what about the controllers? Let's go to our NetBeans project in this case. It doesn't have to be NetBeans, right? And you'll notice here, I have three controllers. Main controller, so that's from the tab pane. And these are the individual tabs underneath the tab pane, right? Kind of like parent-child relationships, right? The parent has two children. So what I did here, all I did was a new Java class over here. I typed console tab controller, right? Finished, and it created this one. I did the same thing 3 times, and just there are empty declarations in there, and you just leave them like that for now. You're gonna link to them, okay? So you're gonna go back to your main.fxml file, and you're gonna go to this controller fold over here, and you're gonna specify the fully qualified name of that controller. And you're gonna do exactly the same thing for the console tab, right? So console tab over here. So I got my console tab controller is the fully qualified name. You're gonna do, lastly, the same thing again for the logger tab.fxml, which I said logger tab controller, right? Those are just intuitive names. So you got your ID, you've got your controller that you are now able to connect to these, basically skeletal structures that you've put up right now. So these FXML files now are going to be, auto-generated inside for you. If I do an edit, you take a look here, and you'll see that all this stuff has been done for you. And because we did the file include, we get the includes here for, the tab dealing with the NASA emissions and the tab dealing with the logger. Now, when you're going to open this file for the first time, again, I've done the demo for you so we can save time. It's going to look like this. You're not going to have the FX ID there. That's the second got you, okay? You absolutely have to manually put that in, okay? So that's unfortunate. Now, there's a naming convention that the source file, okay, so that's the physical FXML file there, it has to be the same name as that without the extension, and the first letter has to be lowercase. And also, you see here, it's the same thing. It's just the naming convention being followed. Once you do that, okay, now you're going to be able to dependency inject those controllers, in this case, into the main controller, right? Because if you look here, it's a little bit long, these lines, right? Unfortunately, is that FX controller that I specified is now here, right? So that's the fully qualified name that I mentioned in Scene Builder. So this guy now, in theory, because it has a hold on these FX IDs, is going to have those controllers that you linked to those in dependency injected. Now, there's a nice thing that the IDs offer. Every ID has its own way of doing it, and that means it's MakeController, okay? So that controller class that you created with nothing in it before now is going to have these 2 lines. Now, this stuff here is the stuff I added, which I'll talk about in a second. So you'll notice that these are the controller, that's the controller for the console and the controller for the logger that you had linked in Scene Builder. The names of the instance variables have to be exactly the same name as the class with the first letter lowercase. Now, here's the third and last got you, which is, I think, the biggest got you, is that you are going to have to put the FXML annotation over here. Okay, so you're going to have to do that in order for it to get dependency injected. If not, you're going to get null all the time. You're going to go crazy trying to figure out why. You're going to think it's you. It's really the way it's been done. I don't like it, but you just got to remember you got to put the FXML there. Now, remember I said that the console tab has to have a way to get a reference to the logger tab in order to send the log message, right? Well, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to inject the main controller into these other guys so they can call some methods of this controller, right? Here I have a method called getVisualLog. So on the logger tab, you got that text area with the logging stuff. So I'm going off the logger tab controller and I'm saying, give me the logger text area, and I'm returning that. So I need the console tab controller to call this method, okay? So what I've done is I've created this private void initialize method. This method is actually going to be called for us by JavaFX for initialization. But here's the other kind of side gotcha here. Because it's private, you really have to put the FXML in order for JavaFX to call it. If you don't do that, then you have to make this public to make it work. So if you go here and do public, life will be good. If you don't, then you got to go back to putting this as FXML private. Now, my preference, right, is to actually make it private. And the reason for that is if you make it public, you don't really know that JavaFX is calling it. When you do it like this, it's self-documenting, right? If you would put it public and you'd be professional, you'd put a comment, right? So this kind of removes the need to put a comment. It's self-documenting in this case. So my console tab controller, I've created a method called inject main controller and I pass it in. So let's go take a look at that. All it is it's passing itself, assigning it to an instance variable, which then is called in this get log method, right? Get visual log. That's the method I just showed you in the main controller. And it gets called when the mouse button is clicked to eventually call the get log method here, appends the text that we saw before. Okay, this is just the business logic of it. It's not important. What's important is to get the controllers to work together. Okay, so you'll notice here that this has already been done for us, and that's because earlier, right, when we went, let's say I went to the console tab, or let's just go to the logger tab, right? That was a smaller one. If I go here and I say source make controller, and I go take a look at my log tab controller, you'll notice here that it's dependency injected the components, right? The logger tab, which actually I don't need. So I mean, if I took the ID off of the VBox, it wouldn't dependency injected for me. The one I really need right now is this guy, the text error. I gave it an ID as well. I didn't show you that, but you should give your IDs, your components that you're going to use, all IDs. In this case, we're just concentrating on the controllers, and that's why I only showed you that. Okay, so that's the method that gets called from the main controller to return that text area. So what JavaFX does is it correctly puts the @FXML for you when dealing with the components, but it just won't do it for you in this case when you're dealing with the controllers. Okay, so that was the third gotcha that I covered. So if I run this thing again, it should work, right? And it does, right? You would get, like I said, a null pointer exception if you had not done what I said in the main controller here by putting this back. So that basically shows you how to have controllers communicate with each other, providing you remember the three gotchas over here, right? Always remember to name your root element and your components, give it an FX ID, right? So that later on, they'll be included inside your include tag when you do file include, right? Now that second gotcha is the FX ID is not in there. You got to put it in there like I showed you. And when you generate the source, you got to put @FXML on those controllers. So some annoying issues. Well, I really don't like the fact that in my main controller, where is that guy? There we go. Okay, well, obviously I don't like that you have to do the @FXML there. Okay, that's pretty obvious for the controllers. But the other thing I don't like is having to do this plumbing code here of having to create a method to pass myself as a reference, and then this guy here, let's say the console tab controller, has to have, has to assign it, and then has to call something that it wants off it, and then I have to go and create another method in the main controller so it can call back. I don't like that. Okay, for me that's a little bit backwards for 2016. I would much rather use a dependency injection framework to do that for me. Okay. The other annoyance that I have is that I can't dependency inject a controller, let's say in the constructor or a setter. It has to be on the properties, and I hate that. Okay, that's good for demo purposes or slides or something like that. But in reality, when you're dealing with having to test the application, I can't stand that. Okay, I find that unacceptable. So those are the major annoyances I have with this. So follow-up questions, I would say, what can we do to address these annoyances? I strongly recommend you use a dependency injection framework to solve those issues, okay? And I recommend either Google Juice if you just need dependency injection of those controllers and nothing else really. If you want to have the dependency injection and you want to have security and you want to have transactions and a whole bunch of other services at your disposal, then you're gonna have to go with Spring, right? Because they really have the whole stack there. I actually have made a video on how to integrate JavaFX with Spring via Spring Boot, which is really the way to go these days. I'm gonna put that link on an annotation. I really recommend you check that out. It makes things a million times easier, cleaner. I love it. That's what I use for my real world projects. So that's basically it for the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to press the likey button and subscribe for knowing what's coming up next and stuff like that. I got my social media links there as well to inform you of what's coming up next. So thanks for your attention. Till next time.